When Jeffrey Epstein died in August 2019, many assumed that was the end of the story. No trial, no public testimony, no justice in the traditional sense. But for the survivors, there was another path forward. A process that most people have never heard of, but one that has paid out millions of dollars to over 150 women. This is the story of the Epstein Victim Compensation Program, how it worked, who qualified, and what it meant for survivors seeking some form of accountability. Before we dive into the specifics of Epstein's program, we need to understand what victim compensation actually is. In the United States, when someone commits a crime and then dies before trial, or when pursuing criminal charges becomes impossible, victims can sometimes pursue civil remedies. But civil lawsuits are expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally draining. They can take years. They require victims to relive trauma in depositions and courtrooms, and there's no guarantee of winning. Victim compensation programs offer an alternative. They're typically funded by the perpetrator's estate or by insurance settlements. The idea is simple: provide financial compensation to victims without forcing them through lengthy litigation. These programs are voluntary. Victims can choose to participate, or they can pursue traditional lawsuits instead, but they can't do both. The trade-off is this: compensation programs usually pay out faster and with less emotional burden, but the amounts are often lower than what might be won in court, and victims give up their right to sue when they accept a settlement. It's a difficult choice. Some victims want their day in court. Others want closure and compensation without years of legal battles. Victim compensation programs aren't common, but they're not unprecedented either. The September 11th Victim Compensation Fund is probably the most well-known example. After the terrorist attacks, Congress created a fund to compensate families of victims and survivors. Rather than forcing everyone to sue airlines and building owners, the fund offered settlements based on calculated formulas. Similar programs have been created for victims of corporate negligence, medical malpractice scandals, and other mass harm events. The key difference with Epstein's program is that it was privately funded and administered, not government-run. After Epstein's death, his estate was valued at over $577 million. That estate became the source of compensation for victims. The Epstein Victims Compensation Program was officially established in June 2020. It was created by the executors of Epstein's estate and administered by Jordana Feldman, a lawyer experienced in victim compensation programs. The program was designed to be independent from the estate's executors, meaning Feldman had authority to make decisions without interference from those managing Epstein's money. Here's how it worked. Any woman who believed she was a victim of Epstein's abuse could file a claim with the program. There was no criminal conviction required, no need to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. The standard was lower. Claimants needed to provide credible evidence that they were harmed by Epstein. The program accepted claims until March 2021. That's a 9-month window for victims to come forward. The administrators reviewed each claim individually. They looked at evidence, interviewed claimants, and assessed the credibility and severity of each case. What kind of evidence did claimants need? It varied. Some women had reported their abuse to police years earlier, so there were official police reports. Some had told friends or family members at the time, providing corroborating witnesses. Some had medical or therapy records documenting trauma. Some had emails, flight records, or other documentation showing contact with Epstein. And some had only their own testimony, but presented it in ways that were detailed, consistent, and credible. The program didn't require proof that would stand up in criminal court. It used a preponderance of evidence standard. Essentially, was it more likely than not that this person was harmed by Epstein? If the answer was yes, they qualified for compensation. One of the most important features of the program was confidentiality. Claimants didn't have to go public. They didn't have to face media scrutiny. They could file their claims privately, present their evidence, and receive compensation without their names ever becoming public. For many survivors, this was crucial. The shame and stigma associated with sexual abuse, especially when it involves powerful people, can be overwhelming.
The program allowed survivors to seek justice without exposing themselves to public judgment. But confidentiality also means we don't know many details. We know the program processed claims from over 150 women. We know it paid out compensation, but we don't know individual amounts, specific details of claims, or the identities of most claimants. That's by design. So how much did victims receive? The program never publicly disclosed a formula or specific amounts. Compensation was individualized based on several factors: the nature and severity of the abuse, the age of the victim when the abuse occurred, the duration of the abuse, the long-term impact on the victim's life, whether the victim had previously reported the abuse to authorities, and other case-specific circumstances. Reports suggest that compensation amounts ranged widely. Some victims received settlements in the low six figures. Others received significantly more. The variation reflected the different circumstances of each case. A victim who was abused once as a teenager might receive less than someone who was trafficked repeatedly over several years. That might seem harsh, but it reflects the legal reality of how damages are calculated. It's important to understand what victims gave up by participating. When someone accepts compensation from the program, they sign a release. That release waives their right to sue Epstein's estate or any affiliated entities. They can't come back later asking for more money. They can't pursue additional civil litigation related to Epstein's abuse. However, and this is crucial, the release only applied to Epstein and his estate. It did not prevent victims from pursuing legal action against other individuals who may have facilitated or participated in the abuse. If a victim wanted to sue Ghislaine Maxwell, for example, accepting compensation from Epstein's program didn't prevent that. If they wanted to pursue claims against other alleged enablers or participants, they still could. The release was specifically limited to Epstein and his estate. This created a strategic decision for victims and their lawyers. Take the settlement now for guaranteed compensation from Epstein's estate, but preserve the right to pursue others later. Or reject the program and pursue a broader lawsuit that might include multiple defendants, but could take years and might not succeed. Most chose to participate in the program. By March 2021, when the claims period closed, over 150 women had filed. The vast majority of those claims were approved and paid out. The program was considered largely successful by victim advocates and lawyers who worked on these cases. But not everyone participated. Some victims chose to pursue traditional lawsuits instead. They wanted their day in court. They wanted public acknowledgement of what happened to them. Or they believed they could recover more money through litigation than through the compensation program. Several lawsuits were filed against Epstein's estate, against Ghislaine Maxwell, and against other alleged enablers. Some of these cases settled, some are still ongoing. The legal aftermath of Epstein's crimes continues years after his death. One criticism of the compensation program was that it potentially let other people off the hook. By providing relatively quick settlements, it may have reduced the incentive for victims to pursue broader litigation that could have exposed more of Epstein's network. Some victim advocates argued that the program, while helpful for individual survivors, may have prevented a fuller public reckoning. Others argued the opposite. They said the program provided justice that many victims wouldn't have otherwise received. Going to trial is traumatic, it's expensive, it's uncertain. Many victims don't have the financial resources or emotional capacity to pursue years of litigation. The compensation program gave them an option that worked for their circumstances.
Is itself a form of harm, that giving victims choices about how to pursue justice is the right approach. The legal community is divided on this. There's no consensus. What's clear is that these programs are becoming more common, especially in cases involving powerful individuals or institutions where traditional litigation might be prohibitively difficult. The Epstein compensation program also raises questions about who else might be held accountable. The program only covered Epstein's personal liability. It didn't address whether banks that handled his money should have known what was happening. It didn't address whether private jet companies that transported victims bore any responsibility. It didn't address whether properties where abuse occurred should face liability.
those questions remain largely unaddressed. Ghislaine Maxwell's criminal conviction in 2021 provided some accountability beyond Epstein himself, but she's only one person in what many victims describe as a larger network. Civil lawsuits continue to target others, but many of those cases settle quietly, without public disclosure of terms or findings. For the survivors who participated in the compensation program, the question of whether it was worth it is deeply personal. For some, receiving acknowledgement and compensation allowed them to move forward with their lives, to pay for therapy, education, or other needs, to feel like someone finally believed them and valued their suffering. For others, the financial settlement felt inadequate compared to the harm they experienced. Money can't undo trauma. It can't restore lost years. It can't erase the psychological damage of abuse. For these survivors, the compensation was appreciated but incomplete. If you want more videos breaking down complex cases with actual evidence instead of speculation, subscribe now. We cover the stories that matter, using only verified sources and court documents. No conspiracy theories, just facts.